Hey everyone, welcome to A Mess Nonetheless. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Melissa, and we are sisters. Hello.
And welcome. Hello, guys. We have a special guest with us. If you're on YouTube, you can already see her. If you are not, you have no idea
she's
because
here.
you're just listening.
She waved at the podcast.
She did wave. We have the privilege and honor of having my good friend Katie Olson with us. Katie, why don't you say hi?
Hey there.
So Katie is going to talk with us today. We are talking about when your friends can't have children or don't have children. So kind of like a mix of they can't because of infertility, or they've chosen not to, sometimes because of infertility and sometimes not. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. So Katie, thanks for being here.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we're going to ask you to just kind of share your story in a 5-minute synopsis if you can.
Okay.
I know sometimes it's hard to consolidate it, but that's not the whole point. So we have questions. Things
Totally. I love it. Sounds good. Yeah. And I mean, we have 10 plus years of infertility. So I will condense that. I'll maybe hit some of the bigger points, but so basically, yeah. So my husband, Tim, is married to, I'm married to him. My husband, Tim.
Yeah, I just told you how I knew. My husband is married too.
Oh my gosh. How do I even begin? So my husband, Tim, is one of Rachel's husband's best friends. So that's how we know each other.
Yes.
But in any case, yeah, Tim and I got married back in 2013. And there's a 7-year age gap between us. So we wanted to start trying to have kids right away. Being a mom was like on the very top of my list of things I wanted to do. So that it wasn't a hard decision. But yeah, Tim and I were trying to have kids for a year and a half before I finally was like, oh my gosh, this isn't working. What do we do? So, kind of had the whole blood work done. Tim had sperm tests done as well. We ultimately found out that he had low motility with his sperm. My blood work otherwise looked fine. And so we decided to go down the path of intrauterine inseminations or IUIs.
Low motility is like slow swimmers, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just it's good for people to know. People are like, I don't know what it means. Yeah.
Totally. Okay. Yep. Exactly. So they're slow. Everything else looked good. It was just that motility issue. And so yeah, doctors recommended either IVF or IUI. IVF was out of our price range, so we decided to try the IUIs. Prior to doing so, I needed to kind of have tests done. So I started with an ultrasound, and then the exact same week they called me back. They were like, we need to have you in for an MRI. Same week they called me back and said, we need to have you take an x-ray, and it's called like an HSG x-ray. It's really painful.
It is painful. It's surprisingly painful.
Oh my
gosh. If any of our
gosh.
listeners are listening and don't know, like we went through years of infertility and only had babies through IVF. So I'm like, yes, anyways, very
So
painful.
crazy. Yes. Oh my gosh. So and so ultimately all of those 3 tests, they found that I had what's called a septate uterus. So it's basically just like a wall of muscle in my uterus. And they're like, you have to have that surgically removed before we do any IUIs. So I had that done. That was back in 2016. I had surgery to remove that. And then we were both kind of like, let's give myself a little bit of time to rest, take a little break. And then kind of simultaneously, we needed to save up money for purchasing our own house. So we kind of put things on hold until 2018, early 2018, we were finally able to do those IUIs. We tried 3. All 3 were unsuccessful. And then that was kind of, they still had a cost to them. It was definitely a few $1,000s each. Yeah. So at the end of that, oh my gosh, it really does. Yeah. And I mean, Minnesota doesn't have any mandatory coverage for insurance for infertility. So everything's paid out of pocket in Minnesota, which is hard.
Dumb.
Well, and very few people just have 10 grand laying around.
Right.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Kids are expensive. You don't expect to pay 10 grand to still not be pregnant at the end.
Yeah.
Precisely. Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally. And it's like, I was working for a nonprofit. Tim was a teacher. So like, we didn't have a huge budget. So, in any case, so once that last one, didn't work, this was April, of 2018, I was like, okay, I need to prove to myself that I can do something really hard. So I signed up for the Twin Cities Marathon, and this was kind of simultaneously around my 30th birthday. And so I ran the Twin Cities Marathon in October 2018. Really hard, never going to do that again. Oh my gosh. but I did it and I finished it and that felt good. But yeah, I kind of correlate. That was like my birth story. Like that was the one thing that I could fabricate as my birth story.
Yeah.
Because
You
something
needed to
hard that I
control
did.
something.
Yes, exactly. That was totally it. So I guess kind of fast forward, and I know this is getting lengthy. Again, 10 years history. But I started getting some ovarian cysts. This was kind of around like 2021. I hadn't had any before, got super bloated, et cetera, et cetera. And then later on that year, I decided to run a half marathon. Again, not going to do that again. Just don't think long distance running is for my body. And so I think I never had this medically confirmed, but I had an ovarian cyst that ruptured during that half marathon. And that's why I'm like,
During
okay,
the
running
race?
maybe isn't bad.
Oh
During
my
the race,
gosh.
yeah,
Oh
mile
my
9.
gosh.
Yeah, it was bad.
I've had
No.
them and you're like doubled over and like you can't move. Like I can't even believe
Right.
that. I never
Well,
heard that
adding
before.
a half marathon is bad enough, and then adding anything else to it
I know.
sounds terrible.
Exactly. And I was running with 2 friends and I felt so bad. I made them walk a couple of times with me, but I was like, I have to finish this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then kind of also around this time, this is like late 2021, early 2022, I learned about functional medicine. And that was just kind of opened up a whole new pathway for us. Because yeah, as you mentioned in the beginning, Rachel, like Tim and I decided like after those IUIs failed, we just needed to take a break. We needed to practice complacency with our lives, not having kids. But when I learned about functional medicine, so basically alternative medicine, it kind of opened up a whole new world for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe instead of, the only answer we had been given by doctors was IVF, go do IVF, but it was out of our budget. So this kind of opened up a whole new realm for me to kind of dig into. And then 2022, I saw a fertility acupuncturist, which was really cool. Loved it. I saw her for every week for 9 months. But then at the end of that, she was like, honey, you need more help than what I can give you. And that was a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
And then kind of later on, I guess this was just only in 2023, about 8 months ago, maybe, I was formally diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Oh my word.
Yeah. And it was, well, and it was kind of one of those things where like I looked back at my past test results. One of the things with PCOS is that you have elevated testosterone. And back when I first had my blood test run, I didn't show elevated testosterone. So this is something my body's been
Developing,
kind of building towards. Yeah. But in any case, and I've kind of done a lot of research, ultimately what I've decided is that stress is the one thing that really affects my body. So I've been really trying to work hard to decrease my stress levels so that I don't get ovarian cysts. Those have been for sure a correlation. And just so that I can help balance my hormones and in the best way I can.
Is a killer to our, but we don't, it's so, everyone has stress and it seems like we should just be able to deal with it. But I agree, it can wreak havoc on our bodies.
Now, to be clear,
100%.
if you're listening and you have infertility, like we're not saying, oh, that's because you're stressed, like go on vacation. That's not, Katie's talking about the way stress affects her body personally.
Correct.
And that in order to keep her body under some sort of control, I guess. So just to be clear, if anyone's listening. Also, if you're listening, you did not go through infertility, do not tell people going through infertility. Maybe you're just stressed.
Yes.
Totally.
Amen. Clear. Katie's not saying that.
This is a conversation with Katie about what her body does. And I know my body reacts to stress poorly in a whole different world, not infertility related at all. So yes, thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of relationships could have been ruined with that.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Amen. 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 Could not agree
like,
more.
Well, 2 women with infertility said it's stress. And we're like, no, we're not saying that.
No,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's so true. And yes,
I know that's not what she's
100%.
saying. Yeah.
No.
So Katie, I want to talk about what are some of the hardest things about living in a world. I mean, you guys are involved, you have friends, you go to church, you're involved in ministry, things like that. What are some of the hardest parts about living in a world Tim's 42? Is that right?
43 now, yeah.
43. I was going to say in your mid-30s, and then I'm like, but that old man, he's even older than you. The joke at Katie's wedding, and Katie and Tim's wedding, was that Tim wanted to be married when like the rest of us were getting married, like 22, but we were like, well, Katie was like in middle school.
Oh yeah.
We had to wait for her. So what are some of the hardest parts about living
Yes.
in a world at your age where you're
Mhm.
childless and most
Mhm.
people are in a different season?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Yes, it's been, gosh, obviously hard in so many ways, and kind of what I view, how I view kind of where we're currently at. We're in grief, but there's five stages of grief, one of
Mhm.
which is acceptance. So we're in that acceptance phase. However, that doesn't mean that we don't slip into other parts of that phase here
Mhm.
and there
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
situations where we see something, maybe a mom's not being kind to her child, or it's like,
Mhm.
oh, that just kind of pulls at the heartstrings or something,
Mhm.
something, anything like that. So all that to say, that's kind of the stage we're in right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, you have to kind of hold it in two different palms. And one of the things that I try to practice is in a situation where I know, like, for example, a baby shower, that's kind of like just an easy example of
Yeah.
something, for women who can't have kids, as you can imagine, is a hard situation.
Mhm.
However, I feel like it's one of those situations too where can you practice pushing your feelings aside for that shower, for that moment,
Mhm.
so that you can love that new mom, so that you can love that new baby coming into this world? Because um as hard as that may sound, and if you're not in that stage yet, don't worry about it. Like, if you can't go to baby showers, don't
Yeah.
worry about it. Don't do
Yeah.
it. But that's what I try to just focus on for a little while, just so that I can love them. Um to push your feelings aside. So that's kind of a little bit going into what I would argue is a challenge for
Mhm.
any women in kind
Mhm.
of in my shoes. But ultimately, to answer your question, yeah, there's a longing, there's a wanting to fit in.
Mhm.
And this may sound silly, but like it makes me feel young. Like the fact that we can't have kids, it
In
makes
a
me
good
feel
way or a
inept. No,
oh,
kind of in a
like
bad way. Yeah.
childish or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you haven't matured to
totally.
that phase or whatever.
Exactly.
That makes
Yeah. And
sense.
I'm like,
Mhm.
but I want to be there, so
Yeah.
that's again kind of maybe a silly example.
No, I don't
Um
think it's silly at all.
Mm-mm.
yeah, and then ultimately just not really able to relate to my good friends on a
Mhm.
deeper level that I
Mhm.
would love to relate to them on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I know when we had two kids, one was a foster child and we had him 6 months, and we had a baby and a 3-year-old, and I became a mom of two, and everywhere I went, I was a mom of two, and then he left, and then I just had this baby because the 3-year-old was our foster child, and I remember feeling like I didn't make sense in groups of women with multiple kids because they didn't know I had
Mm,
experience. It
Mhm.
just looked like I was this new mom of like this 8-month-old or however old he was at the time. And I remember feeling like this feels weird. Like I feel like I don't fit, even though I always had the one. It's a difference, but it's the same kind of thing. And for us, because we couldn't just have kids, and I didn't know when and if we were going to be able to have more. I mean, we obviously did have kids, but we couldn't just easily have them. And
mhm,
so I understand that feeling of like I don't really make sense here. Obviously, I was a mom,
mhm.
but I felt like something had been stripped from me.
Yeah.
It's like
No, that makes sense.
you want the title of mom. I mean, Katie would be the most amazing mother like ever, and
Thank you.
it's like it's been stripped from you
Mhm.
or like robbed, like
Mm.
you've been robbed of that title. That and Tim, like Tim
Yeah.
would be the most amazing dad. Like truly, I cannot think of two more deserving people to have children than the two of you, and it does feel like you should have that title, and it's been like stripped from you.
Hmm.
And
Oh
there's
man, that's really good. I've never thought about it that way. Yeah.
well, there and that's where the grief comes in. You're missing someone that's not there, but you're also missing something you should have been given, so to speak.
Mhm.
It's like
Totally.
most people are just have children. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's not like you're asking for $1,000,000. You're just asking for
Right.
Right.
what God
Asking for
designed us
something
to do.
obtainable.
Mhm.
Yeah. Something that,
Mhm.
yeah, that very few people have. It's something that the
Um,
majority of people are able to have. And so,
yeah.
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 I
Yeah.
want to ask
Absolutely.
Katie too, do you feel like there's a sense of being excluded with being in your season of life, your age, without
Mhm.
children, activities, communities you feel like you don't fit into? Or do you feel like you have found a community or group where people just invite you to everything regardless of having kids or not
Mhm.
having kids?
Mm. Oh, that's a great question. As you mentioned, yeah, we're involved in our church, and Tim, on Wednesday nights, Tim works with the youth group. On Wednesday nights, I work with the children's. So in a way, I feel like that, we're able to get involved in these kids' lives without having our own kids. Definitely almost feel in a way almost inept there too, because like we don't have kids. So I think I know what I'm doing.
Sure.
I just want to love on these kids and teach them about Jesus. But in other situations, I think, when it comes down to it, like if I'm hanging out with a group of friends, for example, I think where some of that exclusion comes in is that, and I can only imagine, like, moms, they just want to talk about their kids. Like, I feel like I would do that exact same thing if I were a mom, that's like the biggest, kids are the biggest part of your lives. And I completely understand why. And so it's kind of in that situation where I'm with a group of friends, they have kids, I can't relate, and then I start to feel a little bit uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, I want to be able to be a part of this conversation and I can't. And so I remain silent, and that can be hard at times. But some ways that, friends include us and we appreciate this so much is just like, still have us over, like if it's a kid's birthday party, for example, we love to be there. Like, we love your kids, genuinely love your kids. We pray for your kids. We want to know about their lives. We want to know about them and what you feel. I think where it gets hard for us sometimes, though, is when we are, ask us questions too. We, even though we don't have kids, ask us how work is, ask us what's going on in our lives. So that we can feel like we can contribute to the conversation, contribute to, things. So that makes us feel a little bit good.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily feel excluded in activities. It's just within the activities, you're like, is there a place for us here? That makes sense. And I think there are people, in your position who do feel excluded. Like, well, people don't invite us because we don't have kids. They don't invite us to a play date at the park, or they don't invite us to a birthday party for a kid. And but it sounds like you have a group of people who do that, and that means a lot to you. You want to keep being invited. Well, everybody wants to be invited, like, even if you don't go. It's like, that makes sense. Well, it leads us right into our next question, which you already touched on, is because, let me pause and say, when we talk about a topic like this, we understand a small percentage of our listeners are going to relate. However, a large percent of our listeners know someone who this relates to. And so not only do we hope they're sharing it with them, but also we're hoping they will listen and learn, okay, what can I do when I have a friend in a position like you, Katie? And, 10 years is a really long time. I mean, it took us like 2.5, 3 years to have our first. And then we dealt with infertility in between the other ones, but I had already had one. And that felt like an enormous lifetime because people were just popping out babies left and right in that time. But 10 years is a long time. Like, you have lived a lot of life in that time, and good life. Like, you and Tim have a great life. And I know you would say that, and you guys go on adventures and you have fun, but it is a long time for you to have learned to live in this world with other people having children and things like that. And so I want to know, what kinds of things would you encourage our listeners who have children to do more of with or for their childless friends? Now, you already mentioned one thing. You said, ask us questions too, or maybe two, invite us and ask us questions. Those are phenomenal, answers. But is there anything else you would encourage our listeners who have children to do when they have friends or family who are going through infertility or just don't have children?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's the age-old question of, when somebody passes in your life, a situation like infertility, there's that question of, do I ask them about it or do I not? And I think nowadays, obviously there's been a stigma about infertility from us, beginning of time. And I think that it's becoming a little bit less of, because it's becoming more of a common thing. I think the statistic still states 1 in 8 couples
Oh, I thought it
go
was
through
1 in
infertility.
5.
It could have decreased. Yeah, I haven't looked at that in a little while, which is great. Like, that's such a huge percentage of people. So I think asking your friends, family members, whomever, who are going through infertility or trying to have kids or trying to adopt or anything like that, ask them how that's going for them. And I think they will absolutely be honest with you. If they can't talk about it, if they can't handle that conversation, they won't. Or hopefully I would hope that they would kindly tell you, like, I don't really want to talk about that. But ultimately, I think for me, it was something I always wanted to talk about, because it was such a huge part of our lives, and also I kind of wanted to explain to people, like, this is why we can't, we don't have kids because we can't have kids. So,
Right.
being able to have an open conversation, asking me about it in the past, that's been really helpful. I think, and like I just said, I've been really open about this in my past. I think some of the only times, so if there's a woman out there going through infertility and you haven't spoken about this to many people, that's fine. Do what you need. I think the one piece of wisdom I would share is that the hardest part being open about our story is when new moms to be come up to me and tell me they're pregnant, and not because they're pregnant, because they feel bad telling me that they're pregnant, and that, like, breaks my heart. I'm like, no, like, don't feel bad that you're pregnant. I want to rejoice with you and be so excited with you. But every time they've been, hey, I'm pregnant, and I'm like, no, like, don't feel that way. Like, but I so appreciate why they tell me that way. But that's like the one part that I would argue has been a little bit like, oh, I regret sharing my story because they've had to share their pregnancy with me in that way. So it's,
well, Katie,
it's that, and
I totally get what you're saying, but you're probably the only person maybe one of two people that they have to do that with. Everyone else in the entire world is rejoicing. So I would not put that on yourself. If they are choosing to be sensitive to you, they're not sad they're pregnant. They don't feel bad for themselves they're pregnant. They just feel bad for you that you have to find out they're pregnant.
Okay,
like,
for sure.
I would not take that upon yourself,
good.
because literally everyone else in the entire world is celebrating for them and with them.
Yeah.
And you are too, but they're taking care of you in that moment. So I would challenge you to, like, reframe your thinking with that, because as somebody who's gone through infertility, I had to tell somebody who had lost their last baby. They were super fertile, but they lost their last baby and their last chance to have another baby. And I did the same thing. I dealt with it with tenderness and compassion, and I wouldn't have wanted her to feel bad for me that I had to do that. I was like, everyone was so excited. We went through IVF. We paid all this money, and we had just had a failed pregnancy loss and IVF right before. And I didn't feel bad for myself. That's being a good friend. And so,
oh, that's helpful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've never really shared that. So thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad you did. And I hope that helps you and anyone else who's listening. And anyone who's listening who is like, I do have this friend who's going through fertility, or maybe has just had a miscarriage or something like that. I do encourage you to continue to be sensitive, but maybe just hear what Katie's saying. It's like, just walk a balance of, like, I'm not sad I'm pregnant. I'm just sad you have to hear this information, or I just want to be sensitive as I'm sharing it or whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, and then I know you said you like people asking you how you were doing in your infertility and how things were going. And I would agree. I felt the same way. And this is for someone who's open. We're not suggesting you pry to someone who's clearly shut the doors of discussing it. However, for me, I did not like being asked at a happy occasion, because I felt very put on the spot. So if I was at a family member's wedding and everyone's enjoying themselves and having fun, because it could move me to the brink of tears, like, instantly. And I didn't want to be interrupted from my fun. And so, but I would have much preferred someone to call me, or this was back when we hardly texted, but call me or texted me, and, now send a Facebook message or whatever, and just say, hey, I didn't want to bother you at the wedding about this, but I just want you to know I'm wondering how you're doing. I've been praying for you. Like, for me, I preferred that, because then I could get it on my own time, and I could receive it in my own way. And if I needed to cry over it, it's like, then I'm just alone, versus being like, now I have to go enjoy the rest of this wedding, but I'm, like, about to cry. Yeah. And so for me, that was what I needed. I didn't want to be asked in the middle of a baby shower or at a wedding or at a fun gathering, unless I was like, sometimes you're at a gathering and you've really gone away with someone and you're just really talking, then it's different. I really just wanted to be asked in a personal and one-on-one way when I didn't feel on display. And so I'll just throw that out there. Everybody's not going to be the same as me, but that was huge for me. I really struggled when I'd be asked, and it was good intentioned people who loved me. And that's why they were asking, but it was hard.
Well, I was thinking that when Katie was sharing what she wants, and I was like, oh, interesting, because I know that that's not always the case with everybody.
Right.
And as a person who has not struggled with infertility, but has had people in my life, my sister obviously being one of them, what I would encourage to people in my situation is, if you are unsure if now is the time to ask them a question, pause and pray and just ask God to really show you when the right time is. Like Rachel said, maybe now is not the right time, but message them later and say, I was thinking about you, but I didn't want to interrupt your fun. So I just want to, but if you feel a sense like, no, this person really wants to talk, then, let the Holy Spirit kind of lead you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also just know that you're not going to always get it right. Like there's so many personalities out there. Even in those personalities, situationally, things are going to be different. Like maybe today Katie feels amazing and can talk about it. Maybe tomorrow she'll be like, please don't mention it ever again. Like, and so our intentions can be honorable and great, and we can still get it wrong. And that's unfortunate, but it is part of life.
Human life.
True.
Yes.
It's so true. Okay. So we talked about the kinds of things that, people could do for their loved ones or whatever. Let's talk about the people who maybe are a little bit more closed off about their journey or haven't shared much or don't want to share much. Obviously that's not you or I, Katie, but having been through infertility, I've met a lot of people along the way, but I want to say, if you have someone in your life like that and you're like, I'm not even really sure what's going on or whatever, I just want to encourage you, just send a card, send a message, and just say, no pressure to ever talk. Just know I'm praying for you and I'm always here. And just leave it there. Because I think people in that situation, they feel alone, even though they're not including people in their journey. It doesn't mean they're not grieving. And just to share with them, like, I just want you to know I love you. I'm thinking of you. I'm praying for you. And I'm always here, And then another thing I would encourage people to do is make connections. So like, people message me all the time. Hey, I know this person who's going through infant adoption or foster care or teenage adoption or infertility, right? Or embryo adoption, literally all the things we've done. And they're like, can I connect you? And I'm like, yep, absolutely. It is always a yes. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get back to people, and I would suggest, if you're going to connect people who are going through fertility, ask them, do you want to be connected? And then ask the other person, are you willing to be, a connection? Yeah. But like Katie's been through this 10 years. If you know someone who's now just 12 months into this, there's a lot they could learn from Katie. And so, if Katie was in your life and you had her phone number, you could be like, could I connect you with this friend if she wants that? And like, I have always been someone who's willing to connect people and being willing to be connected with people. And Katie, I think you would probably agree that that's helpful for people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. I want to hear some things that, some of the biggest things God has taught you in these years of infertility and being childless, because we know there's a host of them.
Oh, goodness. Yes, the Lord has been in this 100%. And kind of going back to the beginnings of our journey, prior to this infertility journey, I hadn't really ever experienced grief before. Never had lost grandparents or just hadn't experienced that really visceral grief before. So this was it was really the first time having been kind of dropped into the deep end of grief. And honestly, and kind of during this time, we were dealing with compound grief. Both Tim and I lost grandmas. We had to put our dog down. So there were things that were kind of piled on when it comes to grief. And so I kind of describe it as that kind of the beginning stages of our grief, or when we were in the depth of it, like this vortex of darkness that kept just like zoning it. Like I just gave me tunnel vision of just darkness, and I'm married to the sweetest man. There were times when I'd walk in my closet before work, literally, tried on a clothing item that maybe didn't fit and crawl into bed because I just couldn't handle it. And he would just gently coax me and tell me I could do it. But so in those times, basically until that darkness crept in completely, I was just at work one day, literally just going to the bathroom, number one, and just in case anybody
necessary information.
Just in case.
Oh my gosh.
And so, it's like the most menial thing you could be doing, which I think the Lord meets you in those places so many times. And I literally just in my brain, in my heart, I felt him put, surely the Lord is in this place and I was not aware. So Jacob's dream from Genesis. And it was like I saw a pinprick of light again, and I was like, oh my gosh, the Lord is in this. Like, holy cow. It was, yeah, that was monumental for me. And so from that moment on, yeah, I just, there were things that, like, songs that would come into my life that I was like, oh my gosh, I need this, that I would just kind of use as prayer. Because interestingly enough, this whole time, the one thing I feel like I can pray for is the Lord's will to be done. I've definitely prayed specifically for kids. I've definitely prayed for that. But ultimately, I feel like that's the one thing that I keep going back to is the Lord's will be done. So in any case, yeah, they were just, yeah, like I said, songs and Bible verses that would just kind of come up. And I felt like the Lord was so kind and gentle to us during that time.
Yeah.
I kind of correlated our story to like being in the wilderness, where, you're kind of just wandering around, not really sure what's going on.
Yeah.
But he's with you during that time. So that was kind of the beginning, part of that. And since then, I've really come to understand the importance of waiting. It's such a biblical concept, and I'm not trying to say that, oh, look at us, we're so holy, we're going through waiting, it's so biblical. I'm not trying to say that at all, but
it is a biblical concept. You are not wrong.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh, there's so many stories of waiting. And obviously, in the Bible, there's Hannah's story. I always actually really kind of studied, so Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the three, patriarchs, and their wives, like, they couldn't have kids either, and so I, God speaks to Abraham that his offspring will be as numerous as the stars, and yet he and Sarah couldn't have kids for so many years. And so it's almost like this, like, correlation to faith when you're waiting, which I'm still kind of trying to grapple. Is it a testing of your faith, or is it more so a building of your faith? I don't really know. But the interesting part is that ever since middle school, I always thought like the Lord had gifted me with the gift of faith, the spiritual gift of faith. And so I'm like, how does this correlate in my life? Like, what are you trying to teach me, Lord? And that is the piece I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
There's a quote by R.C. Sproul, and he says, in a real sense, hope is faith looking forward. And so that's kind of what I've been keeping in my back pocket, is just hope as faith looking forward.
Yeah, I love that.
So I have a question. You seem very sweet in your demeanor about this. You seem, I mean, I can see faith all over your words, and even the way you are sharing yourself with us, like your presence. And have you gone through periods where you've been angry and bitter? Like, has that been a part of your journey? Because I think if so, and I see you nodding and saying yes, like, I think people need to hear that, because you seem like you're in such a good place, which is amazing, but clearly you've been going through this a long time. But I could imagine that the woman sitting here being like, I'm just pissed right now, I'm not okay with this, needs to hear your part of that story.
Thank you for mentioning that. I'm really, really, really glad you mentioned that, because yes, absolutely, 100%. Again, I feel like because we've been in this spot where, like, this is our reality, we've needed to practice contentment. This has been my kind of, this has been the space I've been living in now for, since like 2018. So yeah, it's been a long time. But holy cow, 100%, in the thralls of that darkness, oh my word, I dealt with a lot of anger. I dealt with depression and anxiety. I had never dealt with anxiety before, and suddenly that just reared its head, and everything left me completely reeling. It was like I just felt like I couldn't function as myself. I lost my joy. And that was also kind of going back to why I chose to run a marathon. I needed to, like, find that all of those feelings in me again. I needed to, like, physically push aside the grief and the darkness, and literally just, like, run like one step in front of our, just like to practice that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Melissa, I absolutely dealt with a lot of that. And
Yeah.
it is so valid to feel that way. My goodness, it is so valid to feel that way.
Well,
And
I want
don't,
to go ahead.
don't not feel that way. Like,
Yeah. You have to
Yeah.
feel those feelings.
Yes.
Agreed.
You are hope of what can come.
Exactly.
That God can pull you through those, and you don't have to live in that for the rest of your life. And obviously so much of that is because you pressed in to the Lord and you were like, I refuse to stay here. Like even just taking physical action of running a marathon to like get out of the place you were in. Like sometimes that physical actions can get us somewhere spiritually. I mean, like I know running actually has been a very spiritual thing for me in the past. Like God totally met me when I used to be able to run, and taught me a lot and spoke to me a lot and just kind of dissolved a lot of things in me through that. And so I love that you did that. But I also agree that if you're in the space right now where you're like, I'm just angry, that's okay. And
yes.
Okay, so something I wish I would have done at the beginning of this episode, and so I'm going to record it now and then I'm going to move it to the beginning.
Okay.
Is preface this for people who are like, oh, I don't need to listen to this episode because I don't, I have plenty of kids. Okay, so we're going to do that. And then I'm going to merge it with the beginning. So, so we hope you guys will listen to this episode regardless of where you're at, whether you have had kids for 40 years or 5 years or 1 year, or you're not even planning on having kids. It's way in the future. We believe that every single person listening to this podcast knows someone or will know someone who is experiencing childlessness and infertility or miscarriage and loss. And we believe that listening to this episode will help you, all of us, be better and more loving friends and family members to people walking through this. So with that being said, and then I'll introduce my friend Katie. So before we wrap this up, I'm going to go back. And so Katie, one thing you said that I think is really important for us to touch on, and I know we really need to wrap this up, but this is really important, is you keep talking about grief. And I know when we went through infertility, it did not occur to me for a long time that what I was experiencing was grief. And when I did, it was so eye-opening and validating because I had huge, massive, horrible emotions and feelings all the time. I felt out of control. And I know people walking through legitimate grief, a loss of a child or a sister or spouse or whatever, they feel enormous grief over them at all times of the day. And I thought I was going crazy. And I think some people around me might have thought I was as well. And when I realized this is grief, it's like a backwards grief. You're grieving what never came or hasn't come. It helped me feel so much better about the fact that I need to feel these feelings. I have to. And you said that. Don't not feel these feelings. You have to feel them. You don't have to stay there. And I certainly worked very hard, and I know you have as well, to not stay there. But it is a part of the process. And like you were talking about the 5 stages of grief, being angry and in denial, and, acceptance is part of it. And I definitely got to through those stages as well, or went through those stages. And I think if you're listening and you're going through infertility or miscarriage, whatever it is, and you have not recognized that it's grief, I hope that that's really good news. And if you're listening and you have children, but people going through fertility, I hope you will recognize and acknowledge that what they're walking through is a grief.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's kind of unending because
that's what I was going to say.
Until you have children, which for Katie, 10 years later, they're still in this process. It's like something you have to live with all the time. And so I think that's a really important, I'm really glad that you use that word so we can also touch on that for people on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And if I can just, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think that something that I was thinking through the grief, I experienced a lot of grief after we had our adoption, like when we had a failed adoption, that was completely confusing, and grief was absolutely the word that I would use. But what I was going to say is that what I have seen with people in regards to miscarriage loss, adoption loss, infertility, is that a lot of times people, I just lost all my words. Yeah. Thank you. I was like, I lost my words, almost like, but
you're still feeling
okay.
that way. And
there's like a,
nobody died or
correct. Yes. Like, I don't understand why I don't think people recognize it as grief. I guess that's it. Like, cause when somebody loses a child, loses a parent, loses a sister, like you said, a spouse, everybody sees their grief. Everybody respects that grief. Everybody helps them in the process. Whereas I think that, and so I also agreed when you said grief in the very beginning, I was like, that is a brilliant word, because it is an ongoing grief. Like Rachel said, where is the end of it? And when we invalidate it, it makes the grief worse. I think when you aren't validated in how you are feeling, it's almost like you're more insane.
Well, because then you feel like you have to fight for what you're feeling. And it's like, that's stupid. And
for sure.
All right.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for being on today. We hope that people will gain something from this, all sides of the spectrum. And we just really appreciate you sharing your story with us and walking us through some things.
Yes.
For sure. Thanks for having a platform for me to share it. And I do hope it maybe helps some people out there.
Yes.
Me
You're
too.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, you guys.
You might feel that your life is a mess, but don't feel bad. Ours is too, but we own a microphone and we have no shame. That's why we'll talk about how our life is a mess nonetheless. That's the name of our podcast.